As we get started, let's go through our list of people we need to remember in prayer. How is Bonnie doing? Okay. All right. Bonnie had a brain bleed. Was that last Friday? Friday a week ago, right? And she is now in Lourdes Hospital in room 812. And so remember her in your prayers, if you will, as she begins her long recovery. Who else we need to remember? Okay. Nathan, my youngest, next to youngest, he had his wisdom teeth taken out Friday. So they took out wisdom teeth and they took out a molar, and he's not moving too well. So this morning, the last words I said to him, I was like, "Are you going to be okay?" And he said, "I'm not sure I have legs." I said, "All right, take more medicine." So, but remember him as he goes through his recovery. And so that's a thing he's going through. With our Christmas tree children that we have, we pass this around each week. I think this is the last week to pass it around, but Karen asked me to pass it. So here we go through that process. And what other events we have? You know of anything? Okay. Got the manly party tonight, and so be sure to come to that if you have opportunity. And I think you'll have a good time. We all had a good time last time we did it, and it'll be fun again. And so it's always kind of goofy watching us try to be manly sometimes, but that's what works out well with that. Any other announcements or things going on or happening? Okay, we're quiet today. We had freezing rain for about 15 minutes last night. Where I lived over north of Draftonville. And so I was kind of worried about us not having church, but it turned out all right. And I showed up here early, and there were some icy places, but we cleared the icy places pretty quick out in the parking lot. So it turned out well. You're always scared to death about how the rain's going to go, you know, or the weather at this time of year. I was really scared it was going to snow and we'd have to meet outside like I had said on that thing. I was like, "Do not snow." All right. We're in lesson 10 in our life of Christ. Remember, there's 13 lessons. We're nearing the end. And this is almost the last week. Coming up, the last half a week from Friday to Tuesday. I have AD 30. Some people like to call it AD 32 or 33. 30 is what I'm working with here. And really, it doesn't matter one way or the other. But what we'll be doing is we'll be looking through some of the things that happened through this very last week. First of all, Jesus begins to arrive, and he goes to Bethany, which is right outside of Jerusalem. And a lot of people are beginning to ask, where is Jesus? Is Jesus going to come? Because as he comes through, it's well known that the Pharisees and Sadducees and Herodians really want to arrest him. So is Jesus going to stay away, or is he going to come? Well, now he's made it known he's coming. He has entered into the house of Simone, near where Mary and Martha live. And so as we get there, Martha begins serving him. Mary begins anointing his feet and head with expensive oils. 300 days wages. When you figure up in our mindset that we're off on weekends, this is a year's salary. Can you imagine perfume that costs a year's salary? You know, whatever your year's salary is. That is a lot of money. And Judas, of course, says, "What in the world are we spending this on? You know, let's not waste this money." Now, John makes a point. Why is Judas so upset? He's a thief. He was taking a 10% or 15% off the top every time somebody gave something. This would have been a good amount of money for him to have, right? And this shows a little bit of maybe his mindset as you go through where he's going to betray Jesus. There's an old sermon, which you don't hear very often anymore, but a sermon that came through in the early 1900s talking about how something starts very small and it keeps getting bigger and bigger. And it works through Judas. And it talks about how early in his life he used to complain or whatever. And he took more and more money. and eventually he got to the point where it seemed reasonable to sell Jesus. And the point of the sermon is talking about how to you and I today, we start with a small sin, but sometimes that gets us caught into something bigger and bigger and bigger, till at the end, we end up doing something that we thought we would never in the world do. Maybe today that would be more applicable to drugs. You know, you see people who are on drugs who would do things you would never expect for them. But we see that happening. The next morning, which would be Sunday morning, this is a Sunday morning before the death, he goes in what's called the Triumphal Entry. He sends somebody in to get a colt and a donkey. And this is a symbol of what the judges rode, the prophets rode, and the kings rode in times of peace. And so the disciples go and get the donkey and bring it to him. And he enters into the city. And they throw their clothes down in front of the donkey, and they also throw the palm leaves down in front as well. And they cry out, Hosanna, Hosanna, and treat him as a king and fulfill quite a few prophecies by doing that. And then I want to spend a little bit of time on this barren fig tree. There's two big things coming up in this lesson. The barren fig tree is somewhat there, and also Matthew 24 is a big section we need to cover, and hopefully we'll have time to get to that. Jesus comes up to a fig tree. And as he comes up to the fig tree, he says it is leaved out. He notices it's leaved out. And so he's hungry. And so he goes up to find something to eat, and there's nothing there. He's angry. He curses it. And they come back 2 or 3 days later, and the tree is completely withered. Now, what this is a parable. All right? It's a parable, but not spoken. It's a parable that's enacted. In many ways, a fig tree oftentimes would represent this part of Israel. So in a way, it represents all of Israel. And the way a fig tree operates in that part of the world is a fig tree would produce fruit, and then it would leave. Not leave, it didn't get up and take off. It would show leaves, you know. The leaves came after the fruit would. And so when a fig tree would show its leaves, it was showing that it was already fruitful. And so Jesus, when he sees a tree showing that it's fruitful, he expects to find fruit there. And he goes there, and it's not there. And because of that, he curses the tree, and the tree dies. Now, looking at the nation of Israel, what is this parable teaching? What would you say? You're right. They're not fulfilling their appointed destiny. They said they loved God. They claimed that they followed the Torah. They claimed that they were religious, that they were the God's people of the world, right? But when you got close to them, got beyond what they said from a distance, when he got up and looked close at their life, there was no fruit. Nothing was there. And that angered Jesus to curse the tree. Now, that shows Israel. Israel was claiming that they were following God, but there was no fruit. They weren't showing the kindness, love, justice, and mercy. That was not there. They were perverting the laws of God. And so because of that, God cursed the nation, and the nation of Israel would be destroyed. Now, looking at the church, we sing songs of praise every Sunday. We claim that we follow the truth and that we are non-denominational and that we are the church of Christ, right? That's possessive. We belong to Christ. But when Jesus comes up close to us and examines us beyond our speech and beyond what we show to the outside world, does he find fruit? When he looks at my life, when he looks at your life, does he see evidence of your Christianity in a way that you treat other people? Does he see evidence of your Christianity in the way in which you teach other people about the gospel? Does he see evidence of your Christianity by the decisions that you make? Are you colored by Christ? Does Christ involve in your life? All right. Now we have our third group of parables. Okay. The Sanhedrin's pretty upset because he's just cleansed the temple for the second time. And they come to him wanting to know where his authority comes from. And so Jesus turns it around and he says, okay, you asked me a question. Let me ask you a question and I'll give you the answer. John's baptism, who was it from? Was it from man or God? Well, if they said it was from God, John the Baptizer talked about Jesus, so they would have to accept Jesus. They didn't want to go that direction. If they said, well, John's baptism was just a man-made thing, then the people would be angry because the people had been baptized by John because they recognized him as a prophet. And so they were placed in that situation. And so instead of having to answer one way or the other, they just stayed silent. And so Jesus begins teaching some parables. There were two men, two sons of a father. One son was told, both of them were told to go work, right? One son said, yes, Dad, I will do whatever you tell me to do. Then he went back into his room and played video games. Didn't do it, right? This is the modern translation of the parable. The second guy said, Dad, I'm tired of you always telling me to do stuff. I'm not doing anything. But later he felt bad about it, and he went and he did the task. Okay? Which one of the two sons is faithful? The second one was. Now, how does that parable apply? You have Pharisees, Sadducees, and Herodians who claim they're following God. They say, yes, Lord, we'll do whatever you tell us to do. But they didn't do it. God says those people are condemned. You have other people who are in sin. Jesus talked to tax collectors, to harlots, to the worst sinners of the world. They were people who would not be open to the gospel, at least in our mind. But when they heard it, they repented, and they went and did it. Okay? Now bring that once again to daily application. We are people who, as Christians, people of faith, say that we follow God. But then again, in your daily life, are you following God? Sometimes it's the people we don't expect who turn out to be Christians. Sometimes it's the people who we don't really have high expectations for, who hear the gospel, who repent, and really become active in doing the work of God, in doing the things that God would have them to do. All right? Now your next one is a landowner. And this one would have really spoken to the people. Remember, in the old law, the part of land that you own depended on your family. So you would inherit a piece of land depending on your family and everything else there. Well, by this time, almost 70% of Israel did not live in Israel. They're called the diaspora, or the spreading out, as you'll read in the early part of the book of James. They're the diaspora, the people who've been scattered everywhere because of exile. But these people still inherited the land, but what they would do is they would hire people back in Israel to raise crops, to use the land for whatever, and then they would, mail a portion of the profits back to the people. So this parable speaks to them. It's very, very unique to their culture. Well, here's a man who owns land, and he has got some workers who are working it. And he sends somebody to them to bring in the profits. Well, the men see it, and they don't want to share the profits, so they just kill the guy. Maybe he died on the wayward somewhere. They'd say, hey, we just never saw him. He died. Well, he sends another one and another one and another one. And they keep killing them. And finally, the landowner says, listen, I'll send my son. He has so much authority, they won't kill him. And they send the son, and what the landowners or what the workers say? Hey, if we kill this guy, we might inherit this place. We'd have all the money then. And so they kill him as well. And so then the landowner comes in judgment. All right. What's this parable telling us? What happened all through the Old Testament? Killed all the prophets. We'll talk about that once again when we get to Matthew 23. They killed the prophets from Abel all the way to Zechariah. Killed every one of them, it seems. And the ones that they didn't kill, they didn't listen to. Threw Jeremiah into the well, remember? Cut out his teachings with a penknife. They did not respect the prophets. God sent his son to finally convince the people, and guess what they're about to do to Jesus? Put him to death as well. And so once again, they say these things. Now, thirdly, we have a marriage feast. A marriage feast back in this day was a little bit different than ours. Our weddings are pretty expensive, right? Everybody who's had a daughter says amen, right? Okay? Weddings are pretty expensive, even more so back then. Back then, they would feed people for 7 days. It was a big, huge deal. Many, many years ago, my parents, I remember after I had moved off, they lived in Texas. They were always excited whenever Hispanic people would have weddings because they had the absolute full meal. And so, they're like, oh, yeah, it's great stuff. And Well, these people were kind of like the Hispanics as far as having a full meal for everybody. It was a big banquet they would have. You would invite the most important people you could to bring them to show your importance as well. And so the man is having a big feast. He calls everybody in. Not everybody comes. He's upset about it because it's embarrassing to have an empty place. And so then he goes to the highways and byways and he says, I just want warm bodies. Anybody can come, whether you deserve to or not. I want you here at my feast. And so then he says they all come. Everybody is welcome to come. Now we change the parable a little bit. But after a while, he realizes some people are not wearing the white robes which he's offered. And those who are not wearing the white robes are thrown out. Okay? Now, what's this parable teaching? Jesus should have been the head of all the nation of Israel. They should have loved the moment he showed up because all of their identity is wrapped up in this one Messiah. Did they appreciate him? Absolutely not. And so then when the gospel's called out, who is the gospel sent to? Who did Jesus die for? Just Jews? Just good people? Everybody. God's grace has appeared to all men, right? Titus chapter 2 and verse 11. For God so loved whom? The world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe in him should not perish, but should have everlasting life. Whether you're a woolly crazy booger or whether you grew up in the church, Christ died for you. Whether you are the worst sinner, the chief of sinners, as Paul would call himself, or whether you were just a guy who grew up in the church, Christ died for you. But even though that blood has been shed, to go back to our sermon, it must be applied, right? We must be clothed with Christ, Galatians 3, 26 and 27, in order to be a part of that feast which is there. And so we see those things going on as we go through. He says many times in these parables, many are called, but what? Few are chosen. Absolutely. Well, man, all right. They're pretty mad now, so we're going to try to trip them 2 more times. The rulers come up to Jesus, and they got a question. They say, wait a second, Jesus. As a Jewish rabbi, we want to know your opinion on something. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? Now, taxes are awful, right? But are they lawful? Okay. Can a Jew legally pay money to a Roman pagan? Oh, my goodness. What does Jesus do? He says, give me a coin. Pulls out that coin, and who's on the front of that coin? Caesar. And he says, here is the rule. You give to Caesar what is his due, and you give to God what is his due. All right? Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar. Render unto God that which is God's. Important for us to recognize. Now, you may love the government. You may not love the government. It all depends on what your view is on those things. The government does some things I don't like. I don't like government funding for abortion. I don't like a lot of the social narratives which are out there, which government tries to force me to accept and to call normal and to say it's okay. I don't like some of the facts of things which this government is doing in other countries which we don't even know about, where we're killing so many people. There's a lot of things which the government does not do that I don't like. But does that mean that as a Christian, I need to tell the IRS I'm not paying anything? The IRS doesn't like that. Many people have tried. It has not worked yet, right? As a Christian, should we pay taxes? We'd better do it, all right? They're pretty certain that they like to have tax money from us. But as a Christian, what is my highest priority? God, okay? This is a great country, and I hope she lasts for many more centuries. But you know what's going to outlast this country? God. Jesus Christ will. And so he is our highest priority, which is there. All right? Now, the reason that's kind of funny is the Herodians had come up to ask him that question. Now the Sadducees come up. Now, what do we know about the Sadducees? This is lesson 1, which is about 4 months ago that we covered, 3 months ago. Sadducees didn't believe in an afterlife, all right? They were very influenced by the Greek thought. Greeks believed that once you died, it was over. They did not believe in an afterlife. And Sadducees were very influenced by the Greek thought. So the Sadducees come up with a question, which is crazy because it came from them. Here is a woman, all right? She gets married, her husband dies. She gets married, her husband dies. She gets married, her husband dies, all the way up to 7 times. You wonder what number 5, 6, and 7 were thinking, right? Okay? This woman needed to change her cooking or something, right? Okay. All right, you wonder what was going on. Well, the Sadducees say, okay, Jesus, this woman's married 7 times. Well, if she's married 7 times, whose husband is she going to be when she gets to heaven? You imagine how much work that lady would have to do keeping up with 7 guys for eternity. Poor lady. That's what they're saying. Who's going to be the husband of this lady in eternity? All right, what they're trying to do by their question is say, well, there can't be anything such as eternity. What does Jesus say? In heaven, there's what? No giving of marriage. Now, to you and I, that sounds crazy because one of the more important things in our life is who we're married to. You know, you live with them, they shape you, you shape them. You know, the two are bonded into one flesh, right? And in our mind, we think marriage is the most important thing because it's the strongest thing given to us. You know, you're married to this person for life. We can't imagine a heaven where we get up there and we're not married. But Jesus says that's the way heaven is. In heaven, there's not marriage. There's not the giving of marriage. Heaven, we're going to be transformed and changed in a very different way. Problem about heaven, for me, and I think for most of us, we don't understand what it's going to be like. We talk in our songs about pearly gates and golden gates and pearly streets. That's talking about the church, right? We talk in our mind about how, you know, everything is going to be perfect, and it is. But the Bible writers keep telling us we cannot, in our finite mind, understand how awesome heaven is. 1 John 3:2, John says, let me just put it this way. When heaven comes, we're going to have a body like Jesus, and that's enough. Just recognize it's going to be that way. 1 Corinthians 15, starting in verse 46, going through 57, Paul says that mortal body is going to be immortal. The decaying away is going to be a non-decaying body. It's like you drop a kernel of corn in the dirt, a different plant comes up. You know, you'd look at a kernel of corn and you wouldn't imagine the plant that creates. He says heaven is the exact same way. But we're going to a place that's going to be awesome, that Jesus has prepared for us. Today, you and I hear people who say, I don't want to go to heaven if my husband's not there. Or I don't want to go to heaven if my children aren't going to be there. God has promised us that heaven is going to be such a wonderful place that you do want to be there. But our priorities and our thought processes are going to be so very different. Any more comment about that? Yes, ma'am, Marilyn? Yes. Yeah.
And when he died, he knew he was in torture.
Yes.
And Lazarus was in Abraham's bosom.
Uh-huh.
So when we die, do we know immediately where we are?
I would say so. All right, here's the question. She went back to Luke 16. Figures, huh? Always pull out the Luke 16. Rich man and Lazarus, right? Rich man and Lazarus, they die. Lazarus goes to paradise, Abraham's bosom. He's living in a great place. The rich man wakes in torment. All right? That's about the only picture we have of, you know, what we're looking at when we look at heaven. Her question is, are we going to know our fate immediately when we die? And I think that answer would be yes. What does Paul say in Philippians 1? I would much rather go die and be with whom? Jesus. For me, to live is Christ and to die is gain. I want to go and I want to be with Jesus. When you die, Jehovah's Witness, some other doctrines believe in what's called soul sleep, that you just stay in your body and you're asleep until that last day in which that resurrection comes. The Bible teaches you are immediately gone to be with Jesus. Yes. John 11. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, he finally said he's dead, okay? Yeah, right. Asleep is a euphemism for death that you see there in John 11, right? It's a euphemism or a way of saying it. What do we mean when we say somebody's gone to sleep as far as sweet sleep and they're going to wake up again? All of us in John 8 are going to rise up. Now, the evil and the good are both going to rise up. This kind of goes back to 1 Thessalonians and 2 Thessalonians. It's where you find most of this information. When you die, you go and you be with Christ, or you go to torment. But there's still a day of judgment which is coming where God will bring all things to an end, and we'll all stand before the Lord. My understanding is that we do. Other people don't like that as much, but I think Paul's pretty clear that he wants to die and be with Christ. I think that was what the Jewish person would have thought about as far as being with Christ. Because in their mind, Abraham's bosom was a place with all the saints and where God would have been. Huh? Yes, that's right. One day we're going to figure all this out. And you talk about questions. It's a good thing we have eternity going on, right? Noah, why didn't you slap those mosquitoes, right? I got all sorts of questions to ask. These things that go along. All right. To end everything, well, the third one, the scribe comes, the lawyer comes, and he says, okay, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? Is it circumcision? Is it Sabbath? What's the greatest commandment? Jesus goes back to Deuteronomy 6. What's the greatest commandment? Love, Lord your God, our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor. Okay? The commandment, as John would say later in 1 John, is wrapped around love. Love God, love your neighbor. Those are the two important things. All right. Now here we go. Matthew 23. We are entering into it. As we run into Matthew 23, we see where Jesus begins talking about the scribes. He says, they're in authority. They sit on Moses' seat. They act like they're just like Moses. And he says, but look at the hypocrisy which is here. 7 woes. Now, their woes aren't like where we go, whoa. It's a curse. What are the things these men have done wrong? First of all, they refused to follow Jesus, and they prevented other people from entering the kingdom as well. By their example, they're trying to push people out of the kingdom. Number 2, in their zeal to convert Gentiles to Judaism, they make them twice the son of perdition as they were before. Number 3, in their oaths, they would say, listen, you can promise by this, and it doesn't matter, but promise by this, it really does. Kind of like little kids will do a pinky promise or whatever, or say they have their fingers crossed. He said, by mentioning God with fake promises, you've brought dishonesty and inconsistency to God. Number 4, you emphasize the tithing. You emphasize the outward forms of religion, but you have neglected the greater parts, which are love, justice, and mercy. Or justice, mercy, and faith. Notice how he says this, though. You should have done the former without neglecting the latter. Okay, what they've done is they've completely twisted the gospel, the teaching of God. Number 5, they clean the outside of the temple or the body by their ceremonial washing. In case they had touched a Gentile or a sinner, they would wash themselves. He says you clean the outside, but inside is what? It's filthy as can be, right? And he said they're like a grave. It looks beautiful on the outside, but on the inside, it is nasty, absolutely as nasty as it can be. Okay? Number 6, they say they're righteous, they cry out that they fast and they pray, and yet they're hypocrites. Number 7, he says they denounce all these people who have killed all the prophets in the past, in all the bad things which they've done. But guess what they're going to do within the week? They're about to put Jesus to death. Okay? And so he closes it by crying about Jerusalem, saying that he wished as a hen could gather its chicks, that he could gather his people, but they would not. Matthew 23 is one of the saddest chapters of the Bible. And what we've got to be sure of is that it doesn't apply to us. Don't let Matthew 23 apply to you. Be a person that's not a stumbling block to other people. As much as it is in your power, never be a stumbling block to anyone else. Number 2, when you convert somebody to Christ, don't convert them to yourself, but convert them to Jesus. Okay? Number 3, be consistent in what you say. Try to always put God first and be consistent. Number 4, don't just go through the motions of religion. Show the inward heart as well and the love which is there. Number 5 and number 6, don't be a hypocrite. And number 7, don't judge other people by what you're doing right now, because you may be just as guilty. See how all those work together? Then, of course, we have the widow with the 2 mites. Da-da-dum, right? The widow that has 2 mites, she goes and gives it. It's about a third of what one of our pennies would be. Not even worth picking up off the floor. But what does Jesus say about her giving? She gave more than anybody else. These other people were giving thousands of dollars. Jesus is impressed by her because by her giving, she showed faith. When you gave this morning, was it a show of faith in God? Is Jesus impressed by the faith that you show in what you give? Okay? That's an important lesson on giving there. Now the Greeks come to see Jesus. They come to find Philip. Philip brings them to Andrew. And of course, Andrew brings everything to Christ. And so as Jesus hears of these Greeks coming to see him, most likely he is in the temple. And so the Greeks can't come. They're asking Jesus to come out so that they can be with Jesus and see him at this time. These are proselytes who are not allowed to be there. And Jesus, looking at the temple, looking around, makes it clear the day's coming where those Gentiles are going to be right in here. The day's coming when both Jew and Gentile are going to be a part of the church, which is here. Those are some pretty important parts which come through. Now, I got 5 minutes. I don't know if I've got enough time in 5 minutes to cover Matthew 24 and 25 the way it needs to be covered. So let's wait until next week, and we're going to cover this a little bit better, because once you get this in your mind pretty well, Matthew 24 and 25, a lot of the last things which people are always asking in a church, those things become pretty clear. As you get into Matthew 24, the turning points, verse 34 and 35. Heaven and earth will not pass away, but my word shall remain forever. We'll be right there. All right, as we finish that, any comment on what we covered? We covered some stuff pretty quick in doing the life of Jesus. People are quiet today. Is it the cold weather? Or are we quieter than we usually are? I don't know. We are down today. I don't know if people are sick, or I don't know what the deal is. I don't think it's vacation time yet. We're the most vacationingest church I've ever seen. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes. Absolutely. 2 Corinthians 12, Paul is called up into the third heaven. And as he looks around, he says, "It is too marvelous, too wonderful for me to even describe," right? And because of that, he was given a thorn in his flesh. That's why sometimes people will point to blindness, because he's seen something so great he can't even describe. And as you look at early Christian art, Paul is always bug-eyed. And a lot of people think that he had trouble seeing. In the end of the book of Galatians, he says, "I have to write with large letters to prove that this is myself, my writing, putting it in here." You look through Revelation, as John is called up into heaven. Notice the word like. He's like, it looks like this. It seems like this. He cannot come up with the words to properly describe what he's seeing because it's so awesome. Eye has not seen, nor has tongue ever said the things that God has waiting for each one of us. That's what Romans 8 would say. So there's some pretty good stuff in there. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am, Marilyn? Yeah. Fills the room. Isaiah 6, 1 through 6. Yep. And you see that beautiful throne room scene, which is there. That's true. Good point. Okay. All right. I'll let you out a few minutes early. What's the rule? Don't run in the halls. All right. Thank you for being here.